How did it all go so wrong? This is going to be a perfect night. Oh no, I'm so sorry! Callum, please help me. I have to let go.
I don't know how I got here. Standing alone in a cheap hotel room, my face bruised, my lip bleeding, and my marriage of 5 years falling apart because of one glass of spilled wine. A few hours earlier, I was wearing my best dress, smiling beside my husband at my father-in-law's birthday party. I thought I was attending a celebration. I had no idea I was walking into the night that would change my life forever. Because before the night was over, my father-in-law would slap me in front of everyone. And the man who promised to protect me would look me in the eyes and tell me to apologize. My name is Serena Voss, and at 28 I thought I had a perfect marriage of 5 years with Callum Hart, until that night at his father Douglas Mercer's birthday party. One spilled glass of wine changed everything. The moment the red liquid splashed across his crisp white shirt, I saw a side of my father-in-law I never imagined. But what hurt more than his fist connecting with my face was hearing my husband say the words that shattered our marriage. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me through this journey of heartbreak and healing. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Greenville, South Carolina. My parents were hard-working people who taught me the value of education and independence. Dad was an accountant, Mom a high school English teacher. We never had luxury, but we had love and abundance. They supported me through college, where I earned a degree in graphic design, always encouraging my creative talents. After graduation, I landed a job at a small marketing agency. The pay wasn't amazing, but I loved the creative freedom. It was at this point in my life, confident and settled in my path, that I met Callum. It happened at my friend Priya Osei's art gallery opening. I was studying a striking abstract piece when a tall, dark-haired man with kind eyes offered me a glass of champagne. That was Callum. He was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts about the artwork. We talked for hours that night, exchanging numbers as the gallery closed. Our relationship progressed quickly. Callum worked as a financial analyst at a prestigious firm. He was ambitious and hardworking, but also attentive and romantic. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. After a year, he proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Winnipesaukee. I said yes without hesitation, believing I had found my perfect partner. The first cracks appeared when I met his family, particularly his father, Douglas Mercer. Douglas was a self-made magnate who had built a successful chain of luxury car showrooms across the mid-Atlantic. He lived in a mansion in the most exclusive suburb of the city, kept a collection of vintage automobiles, and made sure everyone knew about his success. From our first meeting, he assessed me like a transaction rather than his son's fiancée. His handshake was punishing, his smile never reaching his eyes. "So, you draw pictures for a living," he said, reducing my career to a child's pastime in one dismissive breath. Callum had warned me his father was old-fashioned and had high expectations, but nothing prepared me for the subtle barrage of put-downs that characterized every interaction with Douglas. He questioned my career. "Not much income in that, is there?" My background, no influential connections, and even my appearance. "You'd look more professional with shorter hair." What troubled me more than Douglas's behavior was Callum's response. Around his father, my confident, loving boyfriend transformed into an anxious people-pleaser. He laughed too loudly at Douglas's jokes, agreed with his opinions, even when I knew he thought differently, and worst of all, never defended me. "That's just Dad's way," Callum would explain after particularly uncomfortable dinners. "He's tough on everyone. It means he's interested." As our wedding approached, I met more of Callum's family. His mother, Vivian, seemed kind but perpetually anxious, always deferring to Douglas's preferences. His sister, Saoirse, was warm when Douglas wasn't nearby, but distant in his presence. His younger brother, Finn, barely spoke, eyes always searching for their father's approval. The wedding was lavish, planned mostly according to Douglas's vision rather than ours. I compromised on almost everything to keep the peace, telling myself it was just one day. What mattered was our life together. But married life didn't create the boundary I hoped for. Douglas expected Sunday dinners at his house, called Callum at all hours with advice, and criticized decisions from where we lived to how we invested our savings. Callum always gave in, insisting his father only wanted the best. The pattern continued for 5 years. Every time Douglas belittled my achievements, questioned our decision to wait on children, or suggested how I should dress or behave, Callum either stayed silent or, worse, agreed. I swallowed my hurt, trying to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, believing I would eventually earn Douglas's respect. There were bright spots when it was just Callum and me. Away from his father's orbit. He was still the man I fell in love with. We traveled, built our careers, made friends. Yet Douglas's shadow stretched over our happiness. Arguments about his influence became more frequent. "You don't understand the pressure," Callum would say. "He sacrificed everything for us." By the time Douglas's 65th birthday approached, the strain showed. Callum worked longer hours at Aldridge and Penn Capital, where Douglas had put in a good word. I was promoted to creative director at a larger agency, a fact that seemed to irritate Douglas even more. "Dad's birthday is really important," Callum emphasized. "Everyone who matters will be there. We need to make a good impression." The invitation wasn't really an invitation but an expectation. Thick cream card with gold embossing, black tie, a note that gifts were welcomed but not expected, which everyone understood meant gifts were absolutely expected and would be judged. "We should get something special," Callum insisted, scrolling through luxury sites. Last year Finn's clubs were a big hit. We settled on a rare vintage Armagnac priced at $3,200. Money we'd been saving for a vacation, but I bit my tongue. This wasn't the battle to pick. The night of the party, I spent hours getting ready. My midnight blue gown cost more than I'd usually spend, but appearance mattered here. I styled my hair in a neat updo, applied careful makeup, and clasped the pearl necklace Callum had given me. "You look beautiful," he said, adjusting his bow tie, though tension bunched his shoulders as he checked his watch. "Dad appreciates punctuality." We arrived precisely 30 minutes after the listed start. Callum's calculation of not too early, not late. The mansion blazed with lights. Valets whisked away cars. Staff collected coats with practiced efficiency. Douglas's home was a monument to himself. A crystal chandelier, a sweeping staircase, walls lined with expensive art chosen for price, not affection, and floral arrangements the size of small trees. "Serena, Callum, you made it," Douglas said, drink in hand, tuxedo perfect, posture clipped. He clapped Callum on the shoulder and gave me a perfunctory air kiss. "Vivian wondered if you'd be on time." "Happy birthday," Callum said, offering the gift. Douglas barely glanced before passing it to a staffer. "With the others. Come along. The Ashfords just arrived. Bernard Ashford is expanding his fund. Opportunities, Callum." As always, he detached my husband and paraded him before power. I found the bar, requested a glass of white, and orbited the ballroom. Vivian smiled politely before another guest tugged her away. Across the room, Saoirse's eyes pleaded rescue. "These parties get worse every year," she whispered. "Have you been cornered by Dad yet?" "Not yet," I said. "He's busy showing Callum off." "Still the perfect son," she sighed. "Brace yourself. He's heading this way." Douglas arrived with Callum and a ruddy-cheeked judge. "Saoirse, Judge Whitfield wants to hear about your case," he said, distaste barely masked. Then to me, "Callum says your little design firm won some kind of award." "My agency won the Regional Advertising Excellence Award for our Children's Hospital campaign," I answered evenly. Douglas's mouth curved. "Nice hobby. Callum's being considered for junior partner, aren't you, son?" Callum beamed under rare praise, not noticing how I'd been diminished. Dinner in the formal dining room was choreography. Silver domes, white-gloved service, conversation steered by Douglas. He held court on taxes and handouts. I knew his first showroom had been financed by his former father-in-law, But no one contradicted him. He baited me for an opinion. I replied carefully about circumstances and safety nets. His laugh was cold. Servers refreshed glasses. Douglas rose to toast family and success, praising Vivian's backbone, Callum's acumen, giving Saoirse a quirky aside, and describing me as the creative spirit who makes posters. Heat pricked my face. I gripped my glass, willing my expression neutral. As we embrace tradition, he concluded, eyes locking on mine, I hope my daughter-in-law will fit more fully into the Mercer way. Perhaps focus on a family of her own rather than those little drawings. Callum and I had chosen, together, to wait on children. Douglas had no right to public commentary. I stood fast, intending to excuse myself before I said something I'd regret. My hip bumped the table. The stem slipped. Time slowed. Wine arced through chandelier light and bloomed scarlet across Douglas's perfect shirt and jacket. The room went silent. Douglas stared at the stain, then at me. Shock hardened into rage. You clumsy, disrespectful. I'm so sorry, I blurted, reaching for a napkin. His right hand flashed. The slap cracked the air. My head snapped sideways. Copper filled my mouth. Blood dotted the marble. I looked to Callum, desperate. He stood, pale, eyes flicking between his father's fury and my bleeding face. Control your wife, Douglas growled. Every gaze landed on Callum. He swallowed. Serena, he said, voice tight but clear. You should apologize to my father. It felt like the floor vanished beneath me. Still, I managed words around the iron taste of blood. Callum wouldn't meet my eyes. Just apologize for the accident. Or you should go, he said. The room stayed frozen. Guests, staff, family, silent, complicit. I straightened, wiped my lip with the back of my hand, and walked toward the door. Heels clicked against marble. I didn't look back at the man who struck me or the man who failed me. Outside, cool air hit like a second slap. Under the portico lights, a valet's face shifted from professional calm to concern. Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need assistance? My car, please, the black coupe. He hurried off. Another valet offered a clean handkerchief. For your lip, he murmured. Thank you, I whispered, holding linen to the split. Red bloomed across the white cloth. Minutes later my car rolled forward. Are you sure you should drive? We can call a taxi. I'll manage, I said, though my hands trembled. In the rearview mirror I caught my face. Careful makeup smeared, a darkening bruise on my cheek, a swollen lower lip. 5 years of compromise, of shrinking myself for approval that never came. And here I was, bleeding and alone in a driveway lined with topiary. I eased down the hill, past fountains that cost as much as houses, and out through the security gate. On the main road I pulled onto a quiet side street and let the sobs come. Humiliation, shock, the sharp grief of betrayal. My phone buzzed, Callum calling, then calling again. I silenced it and drove to a mid-tier hotel downtown, a place neutral enough to feel safe. The night clerk kept his voice even as he took my ID. Room on the 4th floor, he said, offering the keycard and pointedly not asking about my face. The room was bland, but it locked. I set the chain, went to the bathroom, and rinsed blood from my lip. The bruise on my cheek darkened in the mirror. I changed into the hotel robe and stared at the bed, unable to lie down, unable to stop replaying the moment Callum told me to apologize to the man who hit me. Notifications stacked up. 10 missed calls from Callum, 3 from Saoirse, messages I couldn't open yet. I toggled Do Not Disturb and lay still until dawn dragged gray light across the curtains. By then, I had slept hardly at all. There were now dozens of missed calls. Most from Callum, some from unknown numbers, a few from friends. I dialed my closest friend, Zara Ellison. She answered immediately. Serena, are you safe? Saoirse called me. She said. He hit me, Zara, I said, voice small in my own ears. Douglas hit me. And Callum told me to apologize. Zara didn't hesitate. Text me the address. I'm coming. She arrived within the hour, hugged me gently and said, both of them are cowards. She helped me pack the few things I'd brought. You're staying with me, she added in a tone I couldn't argue with. As we left, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to that house. Not to a marriage that would ask me to swallow violence. Not to a family that would dress humiliation in tuxedos. Zara's guest room became a refuge. The next morning my face was worse. Cheeks swollen, lips split, a pain that flared whenever I spoke. Zara took photos for documentation, she said, a steadiness in her voice I leaned on. Urgent care, she insisted. Now. The physician examined me with clinical care. Significant contusion on the left side, laceration to the lower lip consistent with blunt force impact, she dictated. Then she looked up. Would you like resources for relationship violence? The term startled me. I had been calling it a terrible night, an isolated moment. But hearing violence out loud shifted something inside. Yes, I said quietly. That afternoon I called my parents. My mother's voice brightened when she answered, not knowing yet. How was the big celebration, she asked. I told them the facts without garnish. Silence stretched long on the line. Pack what you need, Mom said, voice tight. Your father and I are driving from Greenville. We'll be there by evening. You're coming home. You don't have to. Serena Ellen, she said, using my middle name only when resolute. We're coming. They arrived 6 hours later, faces pale with fury and worry. Mom's eyes filled when she saw my cheek. Dad, gentle all my life, looked like he might march straight to the mansion. No, I told him, putting a hand over his. I need support, not a scene. We spent the evening making a plan. Move me out quietly. See a therapist. Speak to a lawyer. Sleep if possible. The following day, while Callum was at work, Zara and my parents helped me collect essentials from the house. Clothes, documents, devices, a few sentimental items that were solely mine. I left my wedding ring on the dresser. Before we drove back to my parents' place, I made 2 calls. The first was to a therapist recommended by the hotline, Dr. Natalie Okafor. What you're experiencing is trauma, she said gently during a brief intake. Your nervous system is sounding an alarm. We'll work on safety, clarity, and boundaries. The second call was to a lawyer. Document everything, attorney Camille Rhodes advised. Photos, medical records, texts. Don't delete any messages, even if apologies come later. Settling into my childhood room felt surreal. Old posters on the wall, a desk I'd outgrown, my suitcase by the door. I stared at the ceiling and tried to trace the pattern backward. Douglas had never struck me before, but the signs were there. His control, his temper over trivialities, Vivian's flinches, Callum's urge to preempt criticism by controlling me. 2 weeks later, Callum asked to meet at a neutral place. I agreed to a coffee shop with plenty of daylight and witnesses. He was already there, drawn and unshaven. Part of me wanted to soothe him, to slip into the old habit of caring for his feelings first. I didn't. I needed space, I said, sitting across from him. What happened was inexcusable. I know, he said quickly. Dad was out of line. He'd been drinking. He's under pressure with a deal. Stop, I said. Are you making excuses for a man who hit me? No, he said, eyes dropping. He wants to apologize. The thought of facing Douglas made my stomach turn. I don't want his apology, I said. I wanted my husband to defend me. He started to explain his childhood, how no one challenged Douglas, how discipline sometimes meant bruises, how Vivian learned silence as survival. So you know exactly what this is, I said softly. Abuse. He flinched. It's not. He had it hard growing up. We went in circles for an hour. Finally, I set terms. If there's to be any chance, I will never be in Douglas's presence again. We start couples therapy immediately. And you begin individual therapy to address your father's control. He stared, stricken. Never see him again. There are holidays, family events. Then you have your answer, I said. I left the cafe, strangely calm. The next day, I filed for legal separation. I chose myself, not out of spite but survival. In the months that followed, I rebuilt piece by piece. I took a position at a different agency in my hometown, rented a small apartment, and furnished it with things that were unmistakably mine. Color, texture, art I loved. With Dr. Natalie Okafor, I worked through the immediate shock and the slower erosion that had preceded it. How I'd learned to minimize discomfort, how I'd bartered my voice for peace, how I'd mistaken appeasement for loyalty. The slap was the loudest alarm, Dr. Okafor said. But the battery had been beeping for years. 3 months after the separation, I filed for divorce. Callum contested briefly, then, faced with my steadiness, agreed to an uncontested dissolution. We divided assets cleanly. There were no children to complicate the process. The day I signed the decree, grief and relief braided together. 5 years of devotion concluded in a stack of papers, but I could breathe again. That evening, Saoirse called. "How are you?" she asked, then quietly confirmed what I suspected. Douglas's reign had always relied on intimidation. "He broke something in us," she said. "Finn keeps his head down. Mum disappears inside herself. Callum. He was the heir to Dad's expectations." "It explains him," I said. "It doesn't excuse him." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. I'm proud of you for leaving." Healing wasn't linear, but it gathered momentum. I enrolled in a photography class I'd always wanted to take, traveled solo to a design conference in Santa Fe, and stayed to wander through Adobe streets, let sun and silence recalibrate my senses. I went on a few dates, slow and careful, learning to trust my intuition again. At work, I pitched a campaign for a relationship violence nonprofit, channeling rage and clarity into design. The materials helped increase calls to their helpline. Later, the campaign won a national award. The recognition mattered, but the impact mattered more. Months passed. An email arrived from Callum with a subject line that simply read, "Can we talk?" He wrote that he wasn't seeking reconciliation, only accountability. I sat with it for days, discussed it with my therapist, then agreed to meet in a public park. Autumn turned the trees to lacquered gold. Callum looked thinner, quieter, like he'd finally stepped out from under a shadow and didn't yet know how far it reached. "What my father did was assault," he said without prompting. "What I did, what I failed to do, was unforgivable. You deserved a husband who chose you. I didn't." He listened. Something in his tone had changed. Not pleading, not posturing, owning. He told me he'd started therapy, confronted Douglas, and been disowned. He'd lost his place at Aldridge and Penn Capital within a day. "Turns out my father's influence was the scaffolding," he said wryly. "Without it, I had to find my own footing." He took a job at a smaller firm, making less, sleeping more, questioning everything. "I'm not asking you for anything," he finished. "I needed to say I'm sorry to the woman I failed." "Thank you for saying it," I replied. "I don't know if forgiveness will ever arrive, but I'm glad you're breaking the cycle." He nodded. As we stood to part, he mentioned quietly that Douglas was under federal scrutiny for financial misrepresentation. I felt no triumph, only the strange steadiness that comes when truth finally surfaces. Life kept widening. I reconnected with Marcus Adeyemi, a designer I'd admired for years. Friendship unfolded into something gentler. Respect, curiosity, ease. Marcus didn't try to edit me. He listened closely to big feelings and small details and treated everyone, from clients to baristas, with the same unperformed kindness. When I told him about the night that changed everything, he said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you. Thank you for trusting me." With him I learned that love doesn't require shrinking or silence, doesn't place conditions on safety. A year after the divorce, a letter arrived from Callum. He was moving across the country for a fresh start, continuing therapy, volunteering with a men's group focused on ending cycles of harm. "Your courage in leaving forced me to face truths I'd have avoided for a lifetime," he wrote. I folded the letter and tucked it into a small box with mementos, a proof that endings can be beginnings in disguise. 2 years after the party, I stood in a gallery surrounded by my photographs. The exhibition, Aftermath, portraits of resilience. Featured survivors of intimate partner violence not as victims, but as warriors. The project began as my own therapy and grew through partnerships with advocates and grants from arts foundations. Each portrait was paired with a short narrative in the subject's words. Mine was included too. Dr. Okafor came to the opening. "From survival to stewardship," she said, smiling. "How does it feel to stand here?" "Surreal," I admitted, scanning the crowded room. 2 years ago I couldn't imagine this. I was just trying to breathe. "And now you're helping others breathe," she said. My work had shifted toward social impact campaigns, aligning craft with conviction. Marcus and I had built a home bright with plants and color, a space where both of us could unfold without fear. From Saoirse, I learned that Douglas pled to reduce tax charges, paid heavy penalties, and watched his empire sell off piece by piece. Vivian finally left, stepping into a life she should have had decades earlier. Callum moved to the Pacific Northwest to work in environmental finance. He and his siblings leaned on each other the way children do when the house finally goes quiet. I wished them well, from a distance that kept me safe. Late that night, after the gallery doors closed and the last guests drifted into the cool dark, I stood before my self-portrait. In profile, my face turned slightly toward the light, the determination unmistakable. The caption read, "I left with nothing but my dignity." It turned out to be everything I needed to rebuild. I thought about what the journey had taught me. That love should never demand you make yourself smaller. That loyalty to family cannot outrank loyalty to your own well-being. That leaving isn't failure, it's a kind of faith. The broken places weren't hidden. Like kintsugi, they were part of the design now, seams of gold tracing where I had been remade. On the drive home, Marcus reached across the console and took my hand. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "Choices," I said. "How the hardest ones are sometimes the truest." He squeezed my fingers, no more words necessary. Before sleep, I thought of all the people standing at their own thresholds, the raised voice, the raised hand, the unbearable choice. I hoped they would find a safe door to walk through. If my story reaches you, share it with someone who needs a light. Remember, everyone deserves relationships free from violence and control. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Have you made a difficult choice that led to growth? What helped you choose yourself? Please like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and healing. Until next time, be kind to yourselves and to each other.